Myths that turned out to be true. The Soul Swords. Viking warriors had a big problem with their weapons in early Iron Age Scandinavia. They mostly got their iron from bog iron, which is formed when bacteria in a wetland naturally concentrate trace amounts of iron over time. It was easy to gather, but very impure, and impure iron makes soft weapons. Soft weapons in hands of people who fought constantly was a serious minus. Scandinavian smiths found an answer based solely in their spiritual beliefs. They believed that by crushing the bones of dead enemies, ancestors, or animals into the forging process, the spirit of those individuals would be transferred directly into the blade, making it stronger and more fearsome in battle. It was logic that made sense to them. A warrior's strength was in his bones. Feed those bones into a sword, and that strength carries over with them. For centuries later, historians and scientists who studied this practice dismissed it as symbolic ritual having no real effect on the quality of weapons produced. The bones were meaningful to the people who used them spiritually, but had no bearing on the blade itself materially. That was the consensus for a long time. Then metallurgists took a closer look at surviving swords from this period and found something no one expected. Like all organic matter, the bones contain carbon. This was being introduced directly into the iron during the forging process. Steel is iron with carbon added under heat. One of the most important material innovations in human history was being created by Viking blacksmiths who had a spiritual belief in soul transference. They thought the souls were strengthening the swords. The souls were not worried. It was the carbon, but the swords were actually stronger. Gladiators vs Animals. The Roman Colosseum is one of the most well-documented entertainment venues in ancient history. For decades, archaeologists have studied its structure, its records, and the bones pulled from its grounds. Inside, the spectacles on offer were more varied than most people would imagine, ranging from naval battles staged by flooding parts of the arena to fights between criminals, contests between professional gladiators, and executions in front of a crowd of spectators. One thing that was not proved for a long time was whether the professional gladiators ever fought large animals head-to-head. Such meetings were often depicted in period artwork. The mosaics, carvings, and illustrations depicted gladiators fighting lions and tigers in the arena. But archaeologists were not satisfied with evidence of artwork alone, since visual representations of powerful or dramatic events were often symbolic rather than documentary. The images could be symbolic of the idea of the courage and ferocity of gladiators, rather than actually occurring physically. This is why the fight between the gladiator and animal was not officially confirmed. Historians agreed the artwork was there, but were loath to treat it as evidence. That changed in 2025, when the first academic paper was published to confirm physical evidence of animal combat in the Colosseum. Researchers who studied human bones recovered from the site in the early 2000s identified tooth marks on the skull and pelvis of a probable 20-year-old male. The marks were examined and confirmed to be either that of a lion or a tiger. The paintings of these meetings had been considered symbolic for centuries. It turned out they were simply drawing what they saw. The Mythical Gorilla. For an amazingly long time, the gorilla was thought to be a true animal in the Western world. It was filled with sea monsters and dragons, the kind of creature that appeared in the stories of travelers from far away, and that educated people knew to be exaggerations, misidentification, or outright invention. The gorilla was a myth. It is striking because gorillas are large land animals that live in communities. They are not subtle animals. The people who lived near them in Central Africa knew all about their existence. But to Western scientists, the knowledge of gorillas by local populations was not credible proof. So eyewitness accounts of people who had actually seen gorillas in the flesh were dismissed in favor of the scientific consensus that there was no such animal. An early Western description was given by an English traveler, Andrew Battle, who in the early 1600s, while traveling in Africa, encountered a creature he called Pongo. His description was detailed enough that anyone reading it today would know it was a gorilla. It was thrown away. For more than 200 years, the dismissal stood. Only in the 1840s did Thomas Savage, a doctor, obtain real gorilla skulls and properly describe the species scientifically. Even widespread acceptance at the time depended on physical specimens being shipped to Europe before institutions recognized the animal as real. Scientists ignored what local populations always knew and Western travelers had written down firsthand. The gorilla was around for thousands of years before Western science decided it was okay to exist. The Golden Fleece. There are hundreds of stories in Greek mythology, but few have enjoyed as much ongoing attention as the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece. This is the story of Jason, a hero on a quest to find a legendary object, the fleece of a godlike golden ram, hidden away in a faraway land, guarded by a dragon that never sleeps. Jason is successful, The dragon is killed, the fleece is taken. It reads just like mythology is meant to read. Dramatic, symbolic, and certainly fictional. But there was one detail that historians and archaeologists have found increasingly hard to put down to invention. The story locates the destination of Jason in an area that corresponds to present-day Georgia, a country that is located between the Black Sea and the Caucasus Mountains. That geographic detail turns out to be important. Rivers draining the Caucasus Mountains in Georgia carry gold deposits washed from upstream mineral deposits. This is documented and is happening today. And there is historical evidence that people living in that region used a very practical method to collect that gold for a very long time. They spread out sheepskins in the shallow riverbed and let the current flow over them. The fleece caught gold particles as they flowed downstream. When it had gathered enough, the skin was taken off and dried. A golden fleece, in effect. This practice seems to have been carried on by successive generations in Georgia for thousands of years. That is to say, the most famous treasure in Greek mythology was probably not a divine artifact after all. It was a piece of farm equipment. Real equipment used by real people in a real place, which the story correctly pinpointed. The monster bird. The Maori people arrived in New Zealand around the 1400s and brought with them a rich tradition of oral storytelling which served as their primary historical record in the absence of a formal writing system. In that tradition, there was a creature called the pukai, a huge bird so powerful that it could grab and kill a grown man without trouble. It was presented as an actual danger, something to be feared and avoided, not a symbol or ornamental figure in the mythology, but an active menace which the Maori people knew from first-hand experience. This story had been a warning story long ago after European contact, the kind of legend that develops when tribes pass stories from generation to generation with no written records to anchor the details. It was too incredible to be dismissed, a bird large enough to kill a man. Then in 1871, the Haast eagle was officially discovered by scientists, an extinct species that only lived in New Zealand. This was the largest eagle ever known, estimated at as much as 40 pounds, with a wingspan built for hunting rather than soaring. The moa was a flightless bird weighing around 500 pounds and was its main prey. An animal that can kill a 500-pound bird with its talons can almost certainly kill a human. The Haast eagle became extinct around 1445, soon after the Maori arrived and wiped out its main prey. No monster had been created by the Maori. They'd come across one, lived with it for a moment, and remembered it correctly for centuries to come. The empire that wasn't supposed to exist. The Old Testament speaks of a people called the Hittites many times. They show up dozens of times in multiple books, always as a powerful empire with armies and kings and treaties and territory covering a large swath of the ancient Near East. For the ancient Israelite writers, the Hittites were just one known presence in the world, mentioned with the same matter-of-fact familiarity as was Egypt or Babylon. By the 19th century, secular historians had a problem with this. The Hittites were not known to exist anywhere other than the Bible. No ruins, no inscriptions, no artifacts, no records from neighboring civilizations to verify their existence. They noted down every major power in the area they came in contact with. The Hittites weren't there. Assyrian records were equally silent. The lack was so great that some scholars wanted to see confirming evidence from several independent sources, and they regarded the Hittites as a fictional creation, a people invented by biblical writers to fill out their historical stories. Then, in 1906, a German archaeologist named Hugo Winkler began excavating a site called Hattusa in what is now central Turkey. There rose from the ground the capital of an empire. Winkler and his team dug up tens of thousands of clay tablets inscribed with a language that took decades to decode. When finally decoded, the tablets revealed the Hittite Empire in excruciating detail, a civilization that had signed peace treaties with Egypt, fielded armies of thousands, and controlled territory across modern Turkey and Syria for centuries. The biblical writers had been talking about a real empire all along. The historians who said it was fiction just hadn't dug in the right place yet. The land west of the world. The Norse sagas, written in Iceland in the 13th century, relate a series of voyages by Viking explorers some 200 years earlier to a land far west of Greenland. The sagas name it Vinland. They speak of forests and wild grapes, rivers filled with salmon, winters mild enough to graze all year. They talk about setting up a settlement, fighting the native population that is already there, and finally deciding to abandon the colony because the land was too far away from Iceland to defend or reliably supply. For centuries, these accounts were accepted by skeptical readers on their face value. Ornate tales of adventure, the characteristic dramatic geographic hyperbole of medieval Scandinavian literature. Most historians did not take seriously the idea that Vikings had reached North America some 500 years before Columbus. Partly this was because it seemed too pat, but also because no physical evidence had ever been found to substantiate the claim. In 1960, Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and his archaeologist wife Anne Stein began searching for evidence of Norse activity on the northeastern coast of North America. They found it at L'Anse aux Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland in Canada. Excavations revealed the remains of 8 turf and timber buildings, constructed using the same techniques as those recorded at Norse sites in Greenland and Iceland. Iron boat nails, a bronze Norse cloak pin, a spindle whorl similar to those used by Norse women. Carbon dating has dated the settlement to around 1000 AD. The sagas had described an actual place. There was a settlement there for almost 1,000 years waiting to be found. And here is what every case in this video has in common, and it's more important than you think. In every single case, ancient people recorded something accurately. Viking blacksmiths have recorded that bone made their weapons better, and they were right. Maori storytellers told of a man killing bird, and they were right. Travelers from Africa returning told of enormous human-like creatures, and they were right. The artists at the Roman Colosseum painted gladiators fighting lions, and they were right. In Georgia, farmers used golden fleece to gather river gold, and the story kept that practice alive for thousands of years. The idea was correct. There was a shield in Norse mythology to protect the earth from the heat of the sun. In all the cases, the pattern was the same. Ancient people made an observation. Later generations wrote it off as myth or superstition or primitive thinking.